X. The man with the gun made one mistake that night in Cedar Crossing, and it was the same mistake nearly everyone in that town had been making for the better part of a year. He looked at the woman behind the counter, the quiet one, with the close-cropped hair and the apron she never quite filled out, the one wiping down the same 6 inches of laminate over and over like she had somewhere better to be, and he decided she was nobody. Background. Furniture. A body to wave a barrel at and forget. X. You're going to want to remember that, because it matters later. X. Her name was Naomi Achibi, and she had been working the evening shift at the Birchwood Diner for 11 months by the time the storm came. Folks called her Naomi if they called her anything at all. Mostly they didn't. She'd show up at 3:45, tie on the apron, and move through the dinner rush like weather. Present, useful, gone before you thought to thank it. She refilled coffees without being asked. X. She remembered that old Walt liked his toast burnt on one side, and that the Prudenko twins split a single plate of fries and would fight you on the bill if you tried to charge them separate. She was good at the job. She was good at most things, actually, but Cedar Crossing didn't know that yet, and Naomi had decided a long time ago that she preferred it that way. X. Now you have to understand the kind of place we're talking about. Cedar Crossing sits about 4 hours past the point where the radio stations go to static, up where the TransCanada stops pretending it cares about you, and the trees lean in close on both sides like they're keeping a secret. One blinking light. A Canadian Tire that doubled as the unofficial town hall. A rink that the whole town poured its January soul into. X. A Tim Hortons that the locals swore was the northernmost good one, which wasn't true, but you don't argue a man out of his coffee. And the Birchwood, which had been there since before anybody could remember, run by a woman named Margaret Holloway, who everybody just called Marg. X. Marg was the reason Naomi had a job at all. 73 years old, built like a fence post, sharp as the day she'd opened the place with her late husband in 1974. When Naomi had walked in that first cold spring morning, fresh off the bus from God knows where, a duffel bag and a service record she didn't volunteer, and a way of standing that made people nervous without knowing why, half the town would have told Marg not to bother. A stranger, from away, keeps to herself. You know the type. X. Marg hired her on the spot. X. You ever waitressed? She'd asked. X. No, ma'am. X. You ever showed up on time? X. Every day of my life. X. Marg had looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that's really a question underneath a question. Then she'd thrown an apron across the counter. Then you'll do better than the last 3. Don't call me ma'am, it makes me feel like I'm dying. X. And that for 11 months was that. X. Here's the thing nobody in Cedar Crossing knew about Naomi Achibi, and I'm telling you now before the storm so you'll appreciate the irony when it lands. Before the apron, before the bus, before the duffel bag, there had been 10 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. There had been a combat engineer's badge, then a transfer most people don't get offered, then a unit whose name she didn't say out loud anymore. X. There had been Latvia, and there had been somewhere hotter she'd never name, and there had been a night that ended her in a way that doesn't show up on the outside. She'd come home, and the home wasn't there anymore. Not the place, not the version of herself that used to live in it. So she'd gotten on a bus and ridden it until the towns got small enough that nobody asked questions, and she'd stepped off in Cedar Crossing because it was snowing, and the diner was warm and she was tired of riding. X. She wasn't hiding, exactly. She just wanted to be a person who poured coffee. She wanted more than anything to be ordinary, and the town in its small-town way was happy to oblige her. Too happy sometimes. X. Take Curtis Vance. X. Curtis Vance owned half the new builds going up on the south side of town, a fleet of trucks with his own grinning face on the doors, and an opinion about everything that he delivered at a volume meant to fill rooms larger than the ones he was in. He came into the Birchwood 3 or 4 nights a week, always with a couple of his guys, always loud, always certain. X. And from the first week Naomi worked there, he'd taken a particular kind of interest in her. The interest a certain kind of man takes in someone he's decided can't talk back. X. Hey, sweetheart, snapping his fingers. This coffee's cold. You deaf or just slow? X. It wasn't cold. She poured him a fresh cup anyway. X. Where you even from? He'd ask, loud for the table. You got a green card or whatever? They check that around here? X. She'd been born in Scarborough. Her mother was a nurse from Lagos, and her father had driven a TTC bus for 31 years. She didn't tell Curtis any of that. She topped up his water and moved on, and his buddies laughed the laugh that men like that train each other to laugh. Marg saw it. Marg saw everything. You don't have to take that off him, she said one night, low, by the pass. I know. I'll bar him. I've barred better men for less. Don't, Naomi said. It's coffee, Marg. It's fine. And it was. Mostly. Because here's what I've learned about people who've truly been through it. The real thing, the thing that rewires you, they almost never need to prove it. The loud ones, the Curtis Vances of the world, they need you to know how big they are, because somewhere underneath they're not sure. The quiet ones already know. Naomi could have put Curtis Vance through a window with 2 fingers and a half second of effort, and the fact that she chose not to, night after night, wasn't weakness. It was a kind of mercy he was too dumb to recognize he was receiving. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Let me take you to the night it all came down, because that's why you're here. It was the second week of February, and the forecast had been calling for snow all day. The kind of casual prediction that means nothing in February, until suddenly it means everything. By the time the supper rush thinned out, the wind had picked up a tone you could hear through the walls, a low animal moan, and the snow wasn't falling so much as moving sideways in sheets. Marg had the little CBC radio going behind the counter, and the voice on it had shifted from chatty to careful. A winter storm warning upgraded to a blizzard warning, whiteout conditions, the OPP asking folks to stay off the highway, sustained winds gusting to 90. Should we close up? Bryn asked. Bryn was the other waitress that night, 19, a good kid, more freckles than sense, saving up to take a hairdressing course down in the Sioux. Like, should we just go home? Marg looked out the window. You couldn't see the gas station across the lot anymore, couldn't see the road, couldn't see your own truck. Home's the worst place to be in this, Marg said. Anybody out there driving, this is the only light for 100 clicks. We stay, we make coffee. We don't let anybody back on that road till the OPP says so. So they stayed. And over the next hour, the birchwood filled up the way it always does in a real Canadian storm. Not with regulars, but with strangers the weather coughed up out of the dark. A trucker named Gus, hauling lumber, who'd jackknifed his rig into the ditch a kilometer back and walked in with snow packed solid into his beard. A young couple from Thunder Bay who'd been trying to make it to a wedding and now weren't going to. And, most important, keep your eye on this. A woman named Carla and her little boy, Theo. Theo was 6. He was wearing dinosaur pajamas under his snowsuit and clutching a stuffed moose with one eye. And he was wired up with the particular electricity of a 6-year-old who's been told the storm is an adventure and hasn't yet figured out the grown-ups are lying. Curtis Vance was there too. Of course he was. Holed up in his usual booth with 2 of his crew, riding out the storm, getting louder with every refill, treating the whole thing like a party he was hosting. The hydro went out at 9:47. I know it was 9:47 because Naomi clocked it. The clock on the wall stopped, and she was the kind of person who noticed the exact moment the world changed, an old habit she'd never managed to unlearn. The lights died. The hum of the coolers died. For 1 second, there was that pure blackened silence you only get up north, and Theo gave a little gasp, and then Marg's voice came out of the dark, dry as ever. Settle down. It's just the hydro. Naomi, the lantern's under the till. Naomi already had it. She had the camping lantern lit and a half-dozen candles going off the gas stove within 90 seconds, and the diner came back in soft gold. Everybody's faces turned to the light. Gus the trucker started telling a story about a worse storm in '98. Bryn handed Theo a butter tart to keep him busy. It was, for about 4 minutes, almost cozy. And then the door opened. Not the polite open of someone stamping snow off their boots. It banged. The wind threw it wide, and a man came in on a blast of cold and white. And the second he was through it, everybody in that diner felt the temperature drop in a way the open door couldn't account for. His name, we found out later, was Roy Mercer, mid-40s, gaunt, eyes that wouldn't settle. He had a hunting rifle in his hands, not pointed at anyone yet, just held, the way a man holds something he's already decided he might use. There was blood, dried brown, on the cuff of his jacket, and there was the particular wrongness in the air that a body recognizes before the mind catches up, the same wrongness Naomi had spent a decade learning to read in the half-second it gives you. Phone, Roy said. His voice cracked on the single word. Where's the phone? The landline. Nobody moved. Bryn had frozen with the coffee pot halfway poured. The Thunder Bay couple had gone gray. Curtis Vance. And I want you to mark this, because we're coming back to it. Curtis Vance, the loudest man in any room he'd ever entered, had slid so far down in his booth that his ball cap was the only part of him you could see over the table. X. The phone, Roy screamed, and now the rifle came up, and now it was pointed at Marg, who was nearest, 73 years old, and standing behind her own counter with her chin up like she was annoyed more than anything. X. And that's the moment. Right there. That's the moment the whole story pivots on, so let me slow it down for you. X. Because while every other adult in that room was doing the thing bodies do, freezing, shrinking, praying, Naomi Ache had already moved. Not toward the man. Not yet. She'd stepped, smooth and unhurried, so that her body was between Roy Mercer and the little boy with the dinosaur pajamas, and she'd put her hands up, palms open, shoulders soft, every line of her saying, "I am no threat to you," and her voice, when it came, was the calmest sound in that whole howling night. X. There's a landline, behind the counter. I'll get it for you. X. Roy swung the rifle toward her. You stay where you are. X. Okay. She didn't argue. She didn't move. I'm staying. You tell me what you need, and I'll help you get it. Nobody here wants any trouble. There's a 6-year-old in this room, brother. Let's keep our heads. X. Here's something they teach you, in the units Naomi served in, that most people never learn. When you've got a person who's coming apart, armed, panicked, cornered, the worst thing you can do is match their energy. The loud voice answers the loud voice, and you spiral up together into the place where the trigger gets pulled. X. What you do instead, if you're good, if you've done it 100 times in places nobody back home would believe, is you bring your own voice down so low and so steady that the other person has to lean in to hear it. You make calm the loudest thing in the room. You give the panic nothing to push against, and it starts, just barely, to lose its grip. X. Naomi was very, very good. X. What's your name? She asked. X. He blinked. The rifle wavered. What? X. Your name. I'm Naomi. That's Marg. The little guy back there is Theo, and his mom's Carla, and they'd both really like it if everybody got home safe tonight, so. What do I call you? X. A long, ragged breath. Roy. X. Okay, Roy. She kept her hands up. Kept her eyes on his eyes, not the gun, never on the gun. The gun is a distraction. The eyes are where the decision lives. It's bad out there, eh? You driving this? X. Truck's in the ditch. His voice was shaking now, but it was a different shaking. The kind that comes when a man's been running on terror and exhaustion for too long, and the body finally finds someone to dump it on. I need to call before they. Before. X. Before what, Roy? X. It was an accident. And now his face crumpled, this gaunt, scared man with a deer rifle, and the words came out in a flood. There'd been a fight. His brother. Their dad's hunting cabin out past the lake. X. The rifle he hadn't meant. His brother was hurt bad, bleeding, and Roy had panicked and run, taken the truck, put it in the ditch, and now his brother was alone out there in a cabin with no hydro and no phone, bleeding into the dark, and Roy needed to call someone, anyone, before his brother died, and it was his fault, all of it, his fault. X. You can feel the whole room shift, can't you? I felt it telling it to you. Because in the space of about 40 seconds, with nothing but her voice, Naomi had turned a man with a gun from a monster into a person, a stupid, scared, grieving person who'd done a terrible thing and was about to lose the only family he had, and a person you can work with. X. Okay, Roy, listen to me. We can fix this. She took one slow step toward him, just one, telegraphed, her hands still up. Your brother needs help, and the fastest way he gets it is you let me make a call. The OPP can get a chopper or a sled out to that cabin tonight if we move fast. But they're not coming if there's a man with a gun in this diner. You understand? The gun is the only thing standing between your brother and help right now. So here's what's going to happen. X. You're going to hand me the rifle. I'm going to set it on that back shelf where nobody touches it. And then you and me are going to call for your brother. Together. Right now. X. It hung there. The whole diner held one breath. Outside the wind screamed, and inside there was only the candle flicker, and the gaunt man's face working through the worst math of his life. X. And then, God, I love this part, Curtis Vance lost his nerve. X. From under his ball cap, from the bottom of his booth, Curtis chose that exact razor's edge moment to make a break for the door. He came up out of his seat in a clumsy, blubbering scramble, knocking his coffee mug to shatter on the floor, lunging for the exit. And Roy Mercer spun toward the sound and the noise, rifle swinging wild, finger tightening, every bit of the calm Naomi had built up cracking in an instant. X. Naomi closed the distance. I want to describe it, but the truth is, it happened faster than describing allows. One moment she was 3 feet away with her hands up. The next she had the rifle's barrel rotated up and away toward the ceiling with one hand, so that when it went off, and it did go off, the shot punched a hole in the tin ceiling and rained dust down over all of them, instead of through anyone. And with the other hand and a turn of her whole body, she'd taken Roy Mercer's wrist, his elbow, his shoulder, and folded him down to the linoleum like a lawn chair. The rifle was in her hands. The man was on the floor, not hurt, just down, controlled, a knee where it needed to be, and her voice already back to that low, steady register, saying, "I've got you, you're okay, nobody's hurt, you're okay, Roy, it's done, it's over, you did the right thing." 8 seconds maybe, probably less. The shot still rang in everybody's ears. Bryn had dropped the coffee pot. Curtis Vance was flat on his back by the door where his own panic had thrown him, staring up at the woman he'd been calling sweetheart and slow for 11 months. As she knelt on the floor, cradling a rifle she'd just stripped out of an armed man's hands like she was taking a toy from a toddler, and his mouth was opening and closing and absolutely nothing was coming out. Marg was the first one to speak. Of course she was. "Well," she said, into the ringing, quiet, dusting ceiling flakes off her shoulder, "I always said she'd do better than the last 3. Now, you might think that's the end. Big man with a gun, woman saves the day, roll credits. But I'd be cheating you if I stopped there, because the part that actually matters, the part this whole story was always about, happens after." Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't even stand up right away. She kept her knee on Roy Mercer's back, just long enough to be sure, and then she eased off him gentle and helped him sit up against the counter, and she handed Marg the rifle to lock in the back, and she crouched down so she was eye level with this broken man, and she said, "Your brother, tell me where the cabin is." The landline was dead. The storm had taken the lines along with the hydro. But Gus the trucker had a sat phone in his rig for exactly this kind of night. And Naomi sent him out into the white with Bryn holding the door against the wind. And within 20 minutes she'd raised the OPP detachment and walked a dispatcher through everything in the clipped, precise, no-wasted word way that made the dispatcher ask, twice, what her background was. She gave them the cabin's location off the description. Roy choked out. She gave them his brother's likely injuries and how long he'd been bleeding and what to bring. She talked to the paramedic who'd ride the snowmobile out and told her exactly what she'd find and how to pack the wound when she found it. And then she sat with Roy Mercer on the floor of the Birchwood Diner for the 2 hours it took the OPP to reach them through the blizzard. And she didn't lecture him and she didn't judge him. She just stayed. Because she'd learned, somewhere in those years she didn't talk about, that the worst thing a person can be in their worst moment is alone, and that staying with someone is sometimes the only thing one human being can actually do for another. When the OPP finally got there, 2 officers, snow to their knees, the cherry red of the lights smeared into nothing by the storm. They took Roy gently, by both arms, and one of them turned to the room and asked who'd made the call, who'd handled the situation. Every single person in that diner pointed at Naomi. Everyone. Gus and Bryn and Carla and the Thunder Bay couple and Marg. And this is the part. Curtis Vance, who'd finally peeled himself up off the floor, raised one shaking finger and pointed it at her too. And when the officer looked at him, he said, in a voice nobody in Cedar Crossing had ever heard come out of Curtis Vance before, small and cracked and humbled all the way down, "Her. It was her. I don't know what she is, but she saved every one of us." The officer looked at Naomi. "Ma'am, that was about as clean a takedown and de-escalation as I've seen. You job trained? You ever serve?" And Naomi Achibi, for the first time in 11 months, didn't dodge it. She was tired. The adrenaline was leaving her in the long, shaky tide it always does, and maybe that's why she just answered plain. 10 years, she said. Forces. Combat engineer, then I got moved to a different kind of work. I'm out now. A pause. I pour coffee now. The officer nodded slow, the way you nod when a thing makes sense in a way you wish it didn't. "Well," he said, "thank you for your service. Both kinds." They found Roy Mercer's brother alive. Cold, half a liter low, but alive. The paramedic packed the wound exactly the way Naomi had told her to, and he pulled through, and the charge against Roy ended up being a lot lighter than it could have been, in no small part because the OP report described, in careful official language, a situation that had been professionally de-escalated by a bystander prior to police arrival, preventing loss of life, including the suspect's own. X. But you don't care about the paperwork. Let me tell you the part that actually closes the circle. X. The town changed how it looked at her. Not all at once. Small towns don't turn on a dime. And Naomi wouldn't have wanted a parade anyway, would have hated it, would have walked into the lake first. But it changed. Walt started saving the seat next to him at the counter. The Pruenko twins left her a tip that was bigger than their bill, in pennies, which they thought was hilarious. X. Carla brought Theo back the next week, and Theo had drawn her a picture, a stick figure with brown skin and a cape, standing in front of a smaller stick figure in dinosaur pajamas, and a yellow scribble between them that he explained very seriously was the bad guy's gun, but you made it go up, so it's okay. She put it on the fridge in her little rented apartment above the hardware store, and it's still there. I happen to know that for a fact. X. And Curtis Vance. Curtis Vance came into the Birchwood the following Thursday, quieter than anybody had ever seen him, his crew trailing behind him with their hats actually off, and he stood at the counter and waited until Naomi came over and he said, "Coffee when you get a sec. No rush. Take all the time you need." And then, lower, not for the room for once in his life, "I've been an ass to you. Long time. I'm sorry for it." X. Naomi looked at him for a moment. That look, that's a question underneath a question. She'd learned it from Marg, I think. Or maybe Marg had recognized it in her because they both already had it. Then she poured him a cup, fresh, hot, the way she'd been doing all along, whether he deserved it or not. X. "Cream's on the table, Curtis," she said. And that was as much grace as he was going to get, and it was more than he'd earned, and they both knew it, and that's exactly why it landed the way it did. X. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, and then I'll let you go. X. For 11 months, the whole town of Cedar Crossing looked at Naomi Achibi and saw nothing. Saw a quiet woman, from away, who poured coffee. They built a whole little story about who she was out of the laziest materials they had on hand, and they were so sure of it that a man could wave a rifle at her and decide, in the same lazy stroke, that she was no one worth watching. And the truth is, she let them. She wanted to be no one. X. She'd carried enough of being someone to last a lifetime, and ordinary looked like a kind of peace she'd stopped believing she'd get. X. But you don't get to choose the night the storm comes in. You only get to choose who you are when the door bangs open. And when it actually did, the quiet woman wiping down 6 inches of counter turned out to be the steadiest, bravest, most dangerous when she needed to be person in the building. And she spent every ounce of it not on revenge, not on proving anybody wrong, but on keeping a scared man from dying and a little boy from ever knowing how close it came. X. That's the part I'd want you to take with you, wherever you're watching this from tonight. The next time you're standing in line behind somebody quiet, somebody from away, somebody you've already decided is furniture. Remember, Cedar Crossing. X. Remember that everybody you'll ever meet is carrying a whole life you can't see, and some of them are carrying things that would stop your heart if you knew, and the only way to find out is to be kind enough and humble enough to assume there's more to them than you can see. X. Naomi Achibi still works the evening shift at the Birchwood Diner. She still shows up at 3:45. She still pours the coffee, and she's still the calmest thing in any room she walks into. X. She just doesn't have to be invisible anymore. X. What stays with me about that night at the Birchwood isn't the 8 seconds where Naomi took the rifle out of Roy Mercer's hands. It's the 11 months that came before it. The 11 months she let an entire town decide she was furniture, and never once corrected them. I used to think strength was the loud part, the part you could photograph. I don't think that anymore. X. The longer I sit with what happened in Cedar Crossing, the more I'm convinced the real strength was the quiet she carried for almost a year without bending, and the choice she made every single night not to use what she had on a man like Curtis Vance, who frankly deserved a lesson. X. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about how these stories actually turn out. Curtis spent 11 months calling her slow and calling her sweetheart, and the whole time he was teaching the room how to see her, the way a loud man always does. And when the door banged open and a real test walked in with a real rifle, the very confidence that made him big any other night folded him under a table. Cause and effect. X. You spend years building a self out of noise, and noise is exactly what fails you in the one moment that counts. Naomi spent years building hers out of something quieter and harder, and that's what held. X. I keep coming back to the 3 things she was, all at once, in that little gold-lit diner. She was decent. She protected a scared man she had every reason to hate, and she gave Curtis a fresh cup of coffee the next Thursday, when she could have given him the cold shoulder he'd earned. She was sharp. She read Roy Mercer's panic in half a second, and knew that the way out wasn't a bigger fist but a steadier voice, and she talked a man down before she ever had to touch him. And she was unbreakable in a way that has nothing to do with muscle, the kind of inner toughness that lets a person carry a heavy past for a year without spilling it on anybody, and then spend all of it in one night keeping a 6-year-old safe. If there's anything I'd want a person to take from Naomi, it's that you don't get to choose the night your storm comes in. You only get to choose, long before it does, what kind of person you've quietly been building yourself into. Be the one who stays kind when nobody's watching. Be the one who keeps learning to read the room instead of just dominating it. And be the one who can carry weight without complaint, so that when the door finally bangs open, there's something real inside you to reach for. The world will underestimate you the way Cedar Crossing underestimated her. Let it. Just make sure it's wrong.